Good morning. Just give it a few minutes for the participants to all join. Okay, I think we're more or less all complete. Good morning, and welcome to the final conference of the EPC's Affordable and Decent Housing Solutions Task Force. This is held in cooperation with FEANTSA, Schneider Electric Foundation, Foundation Cariplo, and the King Baudouin Foundation. Thank you for joining us for this discussion, which I hope will bring together many of the themes and issues which have been touched upon during the course of the Housing Task Force meetings over the last year. I'm Rayner. I'm a policy analyst in the Social Europe and Wellbeing Programme of the EPC, and I'm pleased to be moderating today. Just some brief housekeeping notes to start, though I'm sure after a year of this, everybody is well versed. But if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand in the participants panel, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. If you would prefer to write your question, then please feel free to write it in the Q&A box. We'll have time for questions after the keynote speech from Commissioner Schmit, and then I hope we'll have an interactive exchange with the speakers in the expert panel. So please feel free to post your questions as they occur to you in the Q&A box, and I will try my best to include as many of them as I possibly can in the discussions as they continue. So to begin, this conference today brings to an end a year of activities of the EPC's Housing Task Force. So during the course of this year, we've explored many issues around housing needs in Europe, how best to tackle the investment gap that we see at present. Our first meeting over a little over a year ago now looked at the characteristics of the housing market, the needs of the most vulnerable segments of the European population, and the affordable housing investment gap. It highlighted that in the EU, at least 700,000 people are homeless on any given night. Furthermore, in 2019, 35% of low to medium income families were overburdened by housing costs, and 29% of them were living in overcrowded conditions. We also heard that from 2008 to 2018, public expenditure on housing decreased by nearly 28%, while housing welfare payments increased by 13%. The investment gap is estimated to be around 57 billion euros a year, which is causing the aging and deterioration of existing housing stock. A second meeting of the task force discussed the diversification of investment instruments and how it could potentially meet the growing demand for affordable housing. Good practice examples from different parts of the EU were examined in more detail. For instance, the BNP Paribas Social Impact Bond, which draws from private capital to finance innovative social projects. In this model, investors pre-fund local organizations such as NGOs who implement social projects. Independent consultants then evaluate the implementation, and if successful, or if the impact KPIs have been achieved, an outcome payer such as a public authority will repay the private investor. The task force third meeting looked more closely at EU level to see how the affordable housing market can make the best use of social and sustainable investment windows, as well as other EU and CEB funding opportunities. And it identified if there were any significant constraints in doing so. We discussed how the affordable housing market can make full use of InvestEU, and we heard the experience of housing providers under the previous investment plan for Europe and considered how those lessons could now help to improve InvestEU. So today this conference is complemented by two publications which outline and explore some of these issues in more detail. The first, an EPC policy brief, Solving the Affordable Housing Crisis, Turning InvestEU into a Success Story, lays down a set of recommendations to strengthen the delivery of InvestEU and to guide member states and EU institutions to better funnel investment to reach those most in need. It looks in more detail at how to tackle the unequal geographic spread of investment, where the most developed countries receive the highest share of EU guarantee. Indeed, by the end of 2017, around 82% of all signed FC financing went to the EU 15. That's 82%. It also explores the importance of national promotional banks and institutions, which can develop projects and co-finance attract additional investment, as well as the need to establish capacity building relations with government agencies or ministries in those countries that are lacking in a national promotional bank. It also looks at the design of InvestEU, and it looks to see how it might actually potentially make it more difficult for small-scale organizations to comply with the financial conditions of a loan. With the EIB financing up to 50% of a project, with the minimum loan amount set to 25 million euros, these conditions could be challenging for smaller cities or housing associations if they lack the finances to fund the remainder of the project. So aside this, it also outlines the potential solutions to some of the challenges identified. Investment platforms, for instance, which group together several stakeholders from a sector to finance smaller projects, to share risks, to combine EU and national support with private investment. Alternatively, in the absence of a national promoter bank or a dedicated governmental agency, more attention should be given to corporate banks, which have shown an increased interest in social and affordable housing market in recent years. More could also be done to strengthen cross-border partnerships between national promoter banks and institutions in developed and less developed member states, which would allow for an exchange of best practice and knowledge more widely, while the NPBIs of national promoter banks would also diversify their investment portfolio and assets. It also looks at the steps that need to happen at member state level in terms of enhancing national welfare systems so that affordable housing is a secure, predictable market for the private sector. Given the vast disparities in social housing allocation amid government budget consolidations, it calls upon member states to strengthen their welfare systems to deliver affordable and decent housing for those most in need. But this must not be done as an alternative to public housing development. Private investment is not a silver bullet for providing housing to the most vulnerable social groups. The extent of the current investment gap calls for more public support in both private investment and public housing. So the EPC policy brief on one hand is also accompanied by a very detailed paper by FEANTSA, which focuses on solutions needed in order to reach the most marginalized in our societies. The paper addresses what type of housing solutions are needed to better address homelessness and housing exclusion in Europe and how this can be achieved. It addresses investment gaps, the role of public and private investment, and the needs of project promoters in this field. It also showcases examples of best practice that we will hear about and have heard about over the course of the Housing Task Force over the last year. The clear and specific recommendations it covers cover the development of thematic investment platforms to target homelessness and housing exclusion. Again, the role of national promoter banks, the planned European collaboration platform on homelessness, development of performance indicators and impact assessments related to homelessness and housing exclusion, and also the role of the European Investment Advisory Hub. I cannot do it justice here in the time I have left, so I'll only recommend that you take a look yourselves, as it really does provide an excellent view of the current potential future bottlenecks for investment in affordable housing and how best to tackle them. Links to both publications have been made available in the chat of this conference, but you could also find them on the FEANTSA and the EPC website. So this is more than enough from me. Just to run through the agenda, we'll now hear from our keynote speaker, Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. This will be followed by time for some questions and hopefully some answers too. This exchange will be followed by a panel discussion where we will explore some of the topics I've just touched upon with Freek Spinnewijn, Director of FEANTSA, Julien Dijol, who's Deputy Secretary General and Policy Coordinator for Housing Europe, and Helmut von Glasenapp, who's Secretary General of the European Association of Long-Term Investors. Unfortunately, due to sickness, our speaker from the Council of Europe Development Bank, Monica Scatasto, is unable to join us today. However, to round the event off, we'll hear from MEP Yana Toom, who has been an active and vocal advocate for the fight against homelessness and housing exclusion in the European Parliament. She will give her reflections on what she's heard during the course of the meeting. So to kick us off, no further ado, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Commissioner Schmit. You're not muted, but we can't hear you, which is a new problem. No, still not.
Yeah?
Yeah, there we go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So perfect, it works. So good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you and to have this exchange of views on housing, on affordable housing. And I really would like to congratulate the EPC and its partners for the relevant work of the task force on affordable housing solutions. And thank you also for inviting me to share views and plans in this area. The launch of the task force was very timely and connecting with the Commission's preparatory work for InvestEU in the area of social housing and social services. I'm convinced that the output from your work on the basis of the report, which is very forward-looking, will be beneficial to a wide range of stakeholders. Housing, and you mentioned that already in your introductory remarks, is a fundamental social issue and plays a central role in a well-functioning economy. First, on income. In 2019, more than 35% low to medium income families were overburdened with housing costs. The number of households that spent over 40% of their disposable income on housing has increased in the last decade. This was particularly true for low to medium income families, while the rest of the population improved their situation, testifying to the growing polarization of the European housing market. Housing costs are higher in cities than in rural areas and represented a burden for more than 1/3 of households living below the poverty threshold. And one can say that the cost of housing is one of the reasons why a lot of people really fall into the poverty trap. In 2018, 1 person out of 7 in the EU was living in a dwelling of poor quality. 34 million Europeans are struggling to keep their homes adequately warm in winter. So public investment in affordable housing has not followed, and this already for a longer period. From 2008 to 2018, public expenditure on housing development decreased by 27.8% from 29 to 21 billion. And this has not been caught up by investment from the private side, because the private side goes in different kinds of housing and is much more guided by profitability and the return on investment. The COVID-19 crisis has underlined how essential a decent home is to health and well-being. It has also demonstrated, once again, how vulnerable low-income families and persons are experience homelessness. The Commission recognizes the importance of accessible, energy-efficient, affordable housing and has put this matter high on its political agenda. Housing and the fight against homelessness and housing exclusion are areas that fall under the responsibility of national and local authorities. However, they also have a clear European dimension, because the housing problem, unfortunately, is a really European problem, and exist in most of our member states and in most of the bigger cities, with a few exceptions. Delivering on the principles and social rights enshrined in the social pillar is a joint endeavor of EU institutions and member states, together with civil society and other actors willing to engage into building fairer and more resilient societies. The social pillar sets the bar high with Principle 19, housing and assistance for the homeless, promoting the reintegration of homeless people into society by means of enabling social services. This is a clear political commitment on the fight against homelessness and housing exclusion. Now, how can we target investments and bring real housing solutions? In the 2014-2020 period, member states allocated approximately 6.7 billion of the European Regional Development Fund to housing infrastructure and energy efficiency. For the 21-27 period, we will continue to put a strong emphasis on housing investments. The Commission has put a strong focus on investment in energy efficient, accessible, and affordable housing in the recovery package and the next MFF. Let me start by referring to the investment in social housing. Social housing will continue to be one enabling service to be put in place in the context of active inclusion strategies. The Housing First approach is the initiative that better reflects the integrated approach of the structural funds, as it does not only relate to affordable housing, but also looks at all the other services needed to ensure sustainability. Principle 19 of the pillar is included among the areas of investment of the European Social Fund Plus and the European Regional Development Fund. Cohesion policy will continue to support the social pillar with investments in social infrastructure, such as social housing and in soft measures related to housing. Thanks to this approach, housing actions supported by the European Regional Development Fund should be combined with projects related to education, employment, or health that can be supported through the ESF+. And here we launch now in a few days the Child Guarantee. And one of the objectives of the Child Guarantee is also decent housing, because we all know that children are suffering a lot from difficult housing conditions. Secondly, investment in building renovation. This can be a strong element in the recovery. In particular, the renovation of social and affordable housing districts has the potential to reduce energy poverty, create local jobs, and bring long-lasting social benefits for communities. In the context of the European Green Deal, cohesion policy, the Resilience and Recovery Facility and InvestEU will make major contributions to the building renovation wave at regional and national levels in the form of financial instruments, grants, or combination of both. Our target is to double the annual energy renovation rate of residential and non-residential buildings by 2030, which could result in the renovation of 35 million buildings, with a very positive impact, especially in terms of CO2 emissions. So finally, we get different objectives with the same investments. Energy poverty is a strong focus of the renovation wave, and the Commission has issued a recommendation to support national, regional, and local efforts in tackling the issue. In addition, it will continue to support the EU Energy Poverty Observatory, which collects data, develops indicators, and dissemination best practices for tackling energy poverty. Finally, it is also key to prioritize the renovation of social housing. Improving living conditions of the most vulnerable through renovation of social housing would reduce energy poverty and bring long-lasting benefits to society. To promote the smart neighborhood approach, the Commission will launch the Affordable Housing Initiative. We are currently preparing the grounds for this initiative by coordinating all the Commission services with competences in the field of housing, construction, energy policy, renovation, and investments, as well as relevant funding instruments and policy guidance. The first phase will consist of several pilots to support the testing of practices in a district approach. Such pilots will allow the demonstration of technology and new methods in construction, adapted to the need of social and affordable housing. InvestEU will be a key instrument to pilot the smart district approach promoted with the Affordable Housing Initiative. We have formalized the ring fencing for a social window and an increased guarantee for social infrastructure within the proposed InvestEU. This will open up new possibilities for investments in affordable social housing. One focus of the funded projects with InvestEU will thus be on the disadvantaged persons and communities, including those that experience severe deprivation. To conclude, we need to mobilize project promoters, municipalities, and service providers to create a pipeline of projects and ensure take-up of the European funds. The setup of this task force and its work program are very timely to raise awareness on new investment opportunities and develop new approaches to housing. The moment is also ripe to drive capital into affordable housing market with the current low interest rates. Homelessness and housing affordability and their social and macroeconomic implications are considered in the context of the European semester and included in the country-specific recommendations addressed to member states. And the upcoming action plan implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights will address Principle 19 on housing and assistance for the homeless. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for a very thorough and detailed look at the challenges as you see them from the Commission side and your responses. The floor is now open for questions if anybody wants to come in. I'll just keep my participants open so I can actually see. I was just wondering from a starting point, especially considering now where we are with the deadline for recovery resilience plans from the member states, what sort of emphasis the Commission is putting on seeing action on housing and homelessness within the priorities of the member states putting forward in their national plans?
Well, the negotiation, the regulation on the recovery and the resilience facility with the European Parliament has shown that the European Parliament has insisted a lot on integrating the social dimension in the use of the funding of the facility. And now certainly it's up to the member states to identify their priorities. And I would really launch an appeal to member states, especially those who are confronted with important housing issues, housing problems, renovation, because many countries now, many member states are engaged in housing renovations. This is the case in France, this is the case in many other member states, because, well, everybody understands that you at least can achieve the climate, you improve your climate balance, you create jobs for SMEs, local SMEs, and a lot of jobs in these professions, and you improve also the energy poverty. So I would really encourage the those member states who need funding for this, because some member states also fund them out of their own resources, to invest more in a rapid housing renovation. There is one risk I always repeat. Housing renovation should not mean that once houses are renovated, that then the type of housing is changing too. That means that finally those who were in these houses, once they are renovated, the price, the rents, they increase, and there is what you call some kind of gentrification, and people have to move out, and higher income categories move in. And this is the risk which has to be prevented. And therefore, there has to be a strong social component when we are talking also about housing renovation. It should not mean, well, you renovate and then replace people, low income with people with higher income. That's what has to be absolutely avoided.
I was wondering if maybe we could hear a bit more about the collaboration platform on homelessness. I don't know whether you're free to give us some insights on how that might look.
So together with FEANTSA and the ambassador for homelessness, Yves Le Terme, the former Belgian Prime Minister, we will organize also with the Portuguese presidency, I think in June, a conference creating a kind of platform to combat homelessness. Again, well, one might say that's not a European competence. Homelessness, that's in the cities, that's in municipalities. What can Europe do about it? Again, it's partly true. It's not a direct European competence, but it's again a European problem. And homeless people are moving, by the way, from one place to another, depending on the seasons, depending on the conditions they might find in one city or another, in one member state or another. And therefore, we have to really build a common approach to tackle homelessness. And there are a lot of good experiences, a lot of good policies. Well, everybody knows about the Finnish Housing First experience, but it's not only Finland that has put this into practice. There are also other places, even also in Lisbon, for instance. I've seen that there are very good practices to combat homelessness. And we hope that on the basis of all these experiences, first, we strengthen the awareness, we have an exchange of experience, we try also to identify funding to really put into place, because homelessness, it's not just about a home, but home comes first, but then all the other social services are needed. So we have to analyze what are the best way to tackle this problem. And I think, therefore, we are launching, in a way, a process. We are launching a process together at European level, looking also, as I said, for funding, inviting all stakeholders, member states, but also municipalities, cities, NGOs, because FEANTSA is very much involved in that. So I think this is the right way to reduce rapidly and dramatically the number of homeless people in Europe.
Thank you. We've had a question in from Julie Lawson, who asks, many Central and Eastern European countries have minimal social and affordable housing sectors, typically privatized in the 1990s. Estonia and Slovakia have devised strategies. Will there be technical support by countries with small, or for countries rather, with small or minimal social and affordable housing sectors?
Well, what is important here is that in the different member states, there's an awareness that social housing, which means quality and affordability, because very often social housing is identified with low quality housing. And certainly in many places in Europe, we have this kind of social housing, which is low quality, difficult environments, and this has to be avoided. So if member states decide we have to tackle the housing problem, and certainly tackling the housing problem means that you are tackling a lot of other problems. You are tackling social integration, social inclusion, jobs, child poverty, criminality. Yes, let's call it by its name. When you have bad environments, these are areas where criminality is increasing. So I think there is a need everywhere to be aware that you can only face this by investing more in affordable, quality social housing. And whoever is the promoter of that, well, you have to be aware that certainly the public side, public authority have to be involved, because the challenge is huge. The numbers of houses or needed are in many areas quite important. Same thing, by the way, is also for renovation, and this big complexes which were built in the 60s in the East as well as in the West of Europe. Well, you have to restructure this, and at the same time you have to create new housing, because as I said, it's the low income who suffering most, but it's also the middle classes who have more and more difficulties to afford a decent house, and this is a really social and economic problem, because finally wages have not followed in many places the evolution of housing prices or rents. So if I say, well, we have to increase minimum wages all over Europe because they are too low in many places, if at the same time housing prices go up and rents go up, well, it's as if we had done nothing, and people at the end are poorer than before. So I think this is an important social issue, but it's also an economic issue, because if people ask for higher wages because they cannot afford their houses, well, then what happens? Companies complain that they cannot pay the higher wages. So I think we have to tackle this housing problem, because it isn't a social issue. It's a overall sociological question in Europe, because it goes deep into the cohesion of our societies, and it's also an economic issue, not to talk about the climate and other issues.
I think that leads us on quite nicely to the next follow-up question, which would be, what would Europe's common approach be to the problems of financialization and excessive speculative investment in rental real estate? I think you've just touched upon it there in terms of the issues. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on that.
I certainly have a lot of thoughts on that, but I've not yet really the key or the answer how this can be resolved, and this is I think as I've mentioned in my presentation, and now we have for at least 20 years or even more, where the amount of money, public money invested in social housing has decreased dramatically, and well, the private sector has not replaced these investments. The private sector has gone to different kind of real estate investment. And this real estate are high quality, for high earners, for speculative reasons. When your interest rates are zero, well, one of the object of speculation, which is perhaps the safest, might be real estate. And that's what happens, and what has happened, and what, by the way, has led us to a financial crisis a few years ago. So I think that here there is a role, an important role, I would say probably between public and private, but the public investment cannot just be absent from relaunching the investment in social housing. I do not see just the private sector being able to do that. So I think there's a strong role for public sector to do that, together probably with the private. I would not exclude that, but there has to be this combination.
This is perhaps a bit speculative of me now, but I mean, I wonder what you feel perhaps the implications of the last year of our lives with the pandemic, what implications that might have for precisely this issue. I mean, the possibility of the changing world of work and so forth, and the possibility of people perhaps living outside of cities, repopulating maybe more rural areas, taking pressure off bigger cities, and also potentially, you know, I know that it's a case in London where a lot of the investors are now moving out of the buy-to-let market because people have also moved out of the city to work remotely from the countryside or whatever. Perhaps there's an opportunity now for rebalancing. I just wonder what your thoughts might be on that.
Well, it's clear that we have seen with the pandemic an acceleration in the world of work, in the sense that remote working has now been a real option. And even after the hopefully rapid end of, at the end of the pandemic, this will stay with us. So remote working will be one way, perhaps not exclusively, but will be there in many companies where remote working is possible. This will have obviously consequences, which are linked to the whole urbanization. You have mentioned the City of London, because, what will companies do? When 1/3 of my staff will be on remote working, not permanently, but, in a way that, rotation, they do not need the 100% of offices they needed before. So they will try to save office space, which will have an impact on the rents of office spaces, and which will free also a lot of office spaces, maybe office spaces which can be used for housing. Because now we have seen that a lot of housing spaces have been used for offices, because the rent were more advantageous. So that's one part. The second one is, if I can be on remote working a larger part in my working time, distance is not so important anymore. So people will try to get further away for having better housing conditions and lower prices. So all this has a lot of impact on how we will plan our cities, how we plan the infrastructures. It will have an impact on public transportation and all that. So I think that the consequence, we do not yet oversee all the consequences on the different markets, on the different systems, transportation, housing, offices, and so on and so forth. And also other services, by the way, which are very much concentrated around the activity centers, and especially in big cities. So this will be that's probably the beginning of a transformation which we do not understand yet completely, but which is which has been initiated now.
Thank you very much, and sorry for such a very difficult question to answer. I realize I'm asking you to predict the future a little bit. But anyway, I'll just one more shout out in case anybody else has any questions that they want to pose. We have a relatively quiet audience today. I think it's still too early. People haven't had enough coffee yet. No, I think we'll round it off there then. That just leaves me to thank Commissioner Schmit for your honesty and your openness, and thank you all for your hard work as well on this topic.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to our expert panel discussion. As I mentioned earlier, we're joined by Freek, Spinnewijn, who's director of the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless, otherwise known as FEANTSA. Julien, who's the Deputy Secretary General, Policy Coordinator of Housing Europe, the European Federation for Public and Cooperative Social Housing, and Helmut von Glasenapp, who's Secretary General of the European Association of Long-Term Investors. That's an organization that gathers European long-term financial institutions to promote long-term investment in close alignment with objectives and initiatives developed by the European Union to foster sustainable, smart, inclusive growth and job creation. So Freek, I'll turn to you first. As I mentioned earlier, FEANTSA has published a very detailed paper regarding investment in affordable housing solutions. Could you perhaps give us more details as to how you see and who you see rather is sort of currently locked out of the affordable housing market? Perhaps you could also touch upon the impact that COVID has had, as you can see it, has it exacerbated the issue?
Thank you, Laura, and good morning, everybody. If you don't mind, Laura, I would like to share a little PowerPoint presentation. I think it will be easier to follow me, so I'll try to share my screen. I have done it in the past, so it should work. I don't know if you see it, but how can I? Do you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay. So I'll try to give a little bit of an insight on the report that we produced. I'm not going into great detail. It's a 70+ page report. If you're interested in the details, I advise you to read it, and it has been posted on the chat, so you can download it. You can download it there. Maybe just before I start, to say that the work for this report has been done by my colleague Ruth Owen, who was supposed to present it, but she's not here with us today. She's unable to be here for a good reason. She got a baby a couple of months ago, so she's enjoying maternity leave. So I'll try to do my best to replace her. So the report that we have produced is called Investment in Affordable and Social Housing Solutions, Reaching the Locked Out in Europe. And I'll tell you a few say a few words about who the locked out are exactly in our view. The report has been produced thanks to the support of the King Baudouin Foundation. It's important to mention that we got some resources to do that kind of work. Now, let me first stress what has already been said, and I'm sorry to repeat some of what Laura has already said and some of what Commissioner Schmit has already said. I think it only shows that we're all more or less on the same wavelength, so I think that's positive. But the demand for affordable housing solutions is rising. That's clear. That's stating the obvious, but probably it's important to continue stating the obvious. For us, we look at the real bottom end of society, and our key topic for FEANTSA is, of course, homelessness. And it has already been said, and sometimes numbers stop to shock people, but I still want to repeat that we estimate that at least 700,000 people, that's a large city, the size of a large city, are homeless on any given day or any given night in the European Union area. That means that they are staying in shelter, night shelter, or living on the street. And that's a 70% increase in the last decade. It's a massive increase. I don't think that people fully grasp the increase. If you compare to relative poverty rates, have stayed at European level more or less stable over the last 10 years. But at the real bottom end of society, there is a massive increase of problems. We have to do something about that.
Your volume just disappeared. I don't know whether that was just for me.
Oh my God.
No, okay, you're back. It's fine. It might have just...
Am I back, or?
Yeah, for us it's fine.
Okay, carry on. Sorry, must be...
Okay, sorry, excuse me. I hope that, yes. So just to continue, if you look at the people experiencing a period of homelessness over the period of a year, you talk about millions of people, of course, and that's also increasing. And it's also increasing in most member states. Also member states with robust social welfare systems like Denmark, the Netherlands, for instance. There is the notable exception that Commissioner Schmit already mentioned of Finland, but I'm not going into detail there. And what we also see is some changing profiles of people becoming homeless. I would like to mention here, for instance, the increase in family homelessness in quite a number of countries, and that's directly related to the inefficiency of the housing market. People become homeless because of housing costs, and families are often the first victims of that. Also, what I would like to say is that it's very difficult to link the level of homelessness with the size of the social housing stock. Of course, social housing is absolutely key to addressing homelessness, but I cannot argue that countries with large housing stock have necessarily less homeless people. So I think we need something more, something extra beyond more social housing. That's what I wanted to say on homelessness. But of course, there is the wider issue of housing exclusion. And I know and I understand and I appreciate that there is an issue with middle income groups, especially in big cities. But we shouldn't forget that the people that are most affected by housing exclusion are people living in poverty. They are really the most affected. And the gap between them and others, let's say the housing haves and the housing have-nots, is growing. If you look at people in poverty, 1/3 is in housing cost overburden, 1/4 is in overcrowding, 1/5 lives in damp housing, and 1 out of 10 is in severe housing deprivation. That's considerably higher than if you compare to the general population. So yes, let's be concerned about the situation of middle income groups, but let's not forget that the people living in poverty are most affected by housing exclusion. And then, of course, there is the impact of COVID. You asked me to say something about it. It's really difficult to say something about it because there is so few data. What we fear is there's many countries that have eviction moratoria in place. We also know that rent arrears are accumulating, but they don't end up in eviction. But at some point that will stop. And we're afraid that we will see a spike in eviction after Corona, and a spike in eviction leads necessarily into a spike in homelessness. So it's worrying. We have seen an increase in homelessness over the last decade. I don't think that we're at the end of the increase yet. Now, before I say a few words about the investment in affordable housing, we also talk in the report about the EU policy and funding context, which is actually quite ideal at the moment to advance on investment in affordable housing. Let me mention just a few things. The EU collaboration platform on homelessness, Commissioner Schmit already spoke about it. This is supposed to be some kind of an action plan that will support member states in their efforts to fight homelessness. It will be launched on the 21st of June at a high-level conference organized by the Portuguese presidency. Within that platform, a focus on housing is going to be important. Like you said, housing solutions to homelessness are desperately needed, and also the link with funding, etc., could be made within that collaboration platform. So that's an important initiative. It's a new initiative. It's not in the mission letter of Commissioner Schmit that he got from the president of the Commission, but still he advances on that. It means that it's considered to be an important issue, important enough to take a specific action on. And then there is all these other initiatives, the Renovation Wave, the new European Bauhaus, the Affordable Housing Initiative. I'm still trying to understand how they link all together. I think that will become clear over the next couple of months. I think there is a challenge to combine the environmental aims and the affordability elements to it. Commissioner Schmit referred to that, but I think it is possible, but also there, investment in affordable housing is clearly possible. And then there is other initiatives, like I just mentioned, for instance, the anti-racism plan, which has an important aspect on housing, etc., etc. So there is other initiatives as well. And also the funding context is quite nice, quite good at the moment. The current MFF and the New Generation EU EU offer unprecedented opportunities to use funding and financing from the EU for affordable housing. In our report, we actually zoomed in on Invest EU and its predecessor EFSI, but it's clear that everything that relates to loans can also be channeled through the New Generation EU and especially the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So you can read it in that context as well. Now, it has been said the high-level task force on investing in social infrastructure says that there is a 57 billion euro investment gap per annum when we talk about affordable housing. If I remember well from the report, it's mostly related to renovation rather than affordability, but other people are better placed to explain that than me. Now, the high-level task force said we need to have investment both in supply, renovation, and support, a combination of housing and social support. And we can only but agree with that. And that's why we took that these three areas of investment where the gap is high as the structure for the report. The big concern that we have is that there is a real risk that the most vulnerable, and I'm not only talking about the homeless, but also the homeless, might get overlooked when we try to boost investment in affordable housing. Let me give me just a few examples. In relation to supply, we definitely need to focus on social housing. But like I said, social housing has to be accessible for homeless people, and that's not always the case. We need also investment in social housing for very marginalized communities. And good examples there are countries like Finland, for instance, where they set up, I think now 30 years ago, a social housing company that was only housing homeless people, and it is now one of the biggest social housing companies in the country that has expanded its reach beyond homelessness. Or in a country like France, where there is a concept that is called very social housing, which aims at the bottom end of society. So we need social housing, but also for vulnerable groups. There is some space for private housing, for a role for the private housing market, but we have to be careful there, as has been said by Commissioner Schmit. I think there is room to socialize the private rental sector. Countries like Belgium, for instance, have experimented with social rental agencies. It's an effective, fast system. It's not cheap, but it makes affordable housing available for vulnerable groups at a quite quick way, in a quite rapid way. And then there is, in terms of supply, the need to be innovative, both in social housing and private housing markets. How do we get vacant housing stock back on the market? Commissioner Schmit spoke about offices. There is a lot of empty church buildings, etc., etc. There is lots of potential there for investment. The second area is renovation. Yes, there is massive space to do stuff on the renovation, but let's not forget the most vulnerable in that space as well. Poor people tend to live in cold homes. So the cost-benefit argument that is made that if you renovate your house, your heating costs will go down, and therefore you can pay the costs back of the renovation. For people that don't heat their house in the first place, it's a difficult argument to be made. So you have to think of investment vehicles that take account of that reality. And also we have to say that some of the people that live in some of the least energy efficient housing are homeowners and private market tenants. And we have to think of ways also with EU funding and financing mechanisms to reach out to them. And then there is a whole area of support where you combine the soft and the hardware, the housing with the social support. And their investment is probably difficult. That's where you have to definitely combine multiple funding streams, loans together with grants, etc. And without going into detail, housing first is a real successful approach there. Now, 2 words about the sources of investment. Commissioner Schmit said it, and you said it as well, Laura. Public investment is absolutely key. You know, you're not going to reach the most vulnerable if you don't mobilize public investment. And recent tendencies are encouraging. I see that in the EU semester process, etc., there seems to be a shift towards more public investment, both grants and loans. but there is space for private investors as well. Let's be careful. Let's also be clear what we mean by private investors. For me, they also include foundations, for instance, or social impact investors, the more social type of private investors. But we have to be careful, always look if we get the right value for public money. That's sometimes a little bit overlooked, and the quality of the outcome. But what is important, I don't think it's either or. We have to think about combinations of both public investment and private investment. That's clear. And there is lots of positive experiences from the FC program, the work of the advisory hub. But again, I'm not well placed to talk about that. In the report, we have 12 case studies of how loans have been used to reach the most vulnerable, or how loans and grants in combination have been reached. I'm not going to speak in detail about any of them. You can read them in the report, but just some of the things that we want to highlight from these learnings from these case studies. First of all, the role of intermediaries to access EU funding opportunities, EU financing opportunities, is absolutely key. Also, the importance of national promotional banks to finance housing solutions. The role of foundations as private sector impact investors, certainly to get projects off the ground in the initial phase, is really important. That's what we learned from the case studies. Also, the potential of social impact investing. But we need better understanding, like what works, what doesn't work, how to do it, etc. So let's not overdo it, but I think there is really scope to do more on social impact investing. There's high demand for equity investment, and often when you talk about very vulnerable groups, the equity investment needed is relatively small. And that's something that is often overlooked. We're probably looking at too big sums. Here we're often talking about relatively small sums, at least in our case studies. The need to blend funding and financing stream, grants and loans, and all types of other financial vehicle. And then again, I can only emphasize it again, the importance of public funding in all of that. And almost at the end, I want to end with a few of the EU recommendations that are integrated in the report. I don't take them all. You already mentioned some of them, Laura, but let me just quickly repeat. The promotion of the creation of thematic investment platforms at subnational or national level on housing. I think we can build on the French example of the Alliance for Sustainable and Inclusive Housing, which has been created and is up and running now. It's a really impressive piece of work that can serve as an example for other countries. I think we should expand the work of the advisory hub on social outcomes investment to further build the evidence base for social outcomes investment, like social impact bonds, and facilitate access to expertise. There is really still a lack of expertise in many countries and in many interest project promoters. Promote probably the Housing Finance Agency and maybe other examples as best practice to channel EU finance into affordable housing. The Housing Finance Agency does that very effectively. It's an Irish public institution. I think that the collaboration platform on homelessness should support member states to use the EU budget and financing opportunities to fund housing solutions for the homeless. And if I listen carefully to Commissioner Schmit, I think that's what he said the platform will do. So we'll remember that. Member states should include housing solutions for the locked out in their programs for cohesion policy, ERDF, ESF and others, and the recovery and resilience plans. I think that has already been said as well. Public authorities should also exploit the opportunities brought by COVID to invest in innovative housing solutions. I'm thinking of tourist accommodation, for instance. There is potential to turn tourist accommodation into affordable housing solutions. We are working with the Council of Europe Development Bank at the moment to see if there is an investment case that can be made to buy up cheap hotels that are currently housing temporarily homeless people, to buy them up and turn the hotels into supported housing. There is potential there as well. And that potential has been created by COVID. I think we have to monitor carefully the social impact of EU financing into affordable housing. I think there's too little monitoring there. Is it really social? To what extent is it social? Can it be more social? And then what Commissioner Schmit said already, we need more technical advice from the European Commission, the EIB, to turn good ideas into investable projects. He said, he called it a pipeline of projects. We should do that. There is lots of ideas, but the ideas have to be turned with technical advice into investable projects. And we're happy as FEANTSA to help with that. So that's what I wanted to say, Laura. I hope I was not too long. I know we're not so pressed for time, but sorry if I was a bit too long. Thank you.
No, it's perfect, Freek. Thank you. Well, Thank you. Yeah, and actually that does lead us nicely onto Julien. I was indeed exactly as Freek has touched upon. The estimated investment gap is 57 billion euros a year for affordable housing market. I was wondering if you could maybe touch upon what you see as the leading causes of this gap and how it's affecting the existing housing stock.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think both Commissioner Schmit and Freek have mentioned already some of the underlying reason behind this investment gap. But if we want to look at maybe in a more detailed way on the supply side and on the demand side, clearly it's a story of persistent and structural underinvestment in public housing, as has been said by both Freek and Commissioner Schmit. And it's a story as well of evolving and changing housing needs on the demand side. Just to start with the structural underinvestment in public housing, I mean, this story dates back to probably, the global financial crisis in 2005, or 09, sorry. And since then, there's a constant or steady decrease in public spending for housing, both on the capital expenditure side and also the housing allowances. And this materialized into also a decrease of the proportion of the size of social housing in different countries, including the Netherlands, for instance, and Germany. And in countries where the proportion of social housing has remained, globally speaking, the same, there is fewer and fewer social housing units built. This, of course, has a very dramatic consequence on the access to affordable housing. So that's one side of the story. And of course, on the supply side, it's not only a question of the provision of funding, but also it's a question of the availability of land. And here, this is a very important point. Usually, when you do a housing project, the proportion of the land represents about 20% of the costs of a project. And I mean, in capital cities, you may really reach a higher level. And this proportion really rises very rapidly. And this is one of the proportion compared to labor costs or other elements. This is the proportion which rises the most in the overall different elements of the cost of a project. So the question of availability of land is crucial. And of course, it means that cities have a key role to play. Usually they have the regulatory tools to ensure that public land will be available at reasonable price for social housing providers. But maybe we'll come back to that later on. And on the demand side, the story of changing housing needs I was talking about is really, we all know what happened in 2015-16 with a migration who had a tremendous impact in countries like Sweden and Germany. In terms of the demand for social housing. But what is been less known, but still very important, is the intra-European migration, or including in migration within one country, like in Czech Republic, in Czechia, where there's a very strong migration from let's say the small cities into the capital city, Prague, which leads to also an important increase of price in those important cities. So we have this issue of demand side and supply side, which create the perfect storm in a way, where you have actually indeed a lack of available supply and a sharp increase of demand. And of course, this was the reality before COVID-19. Now, COVID-19 has obviously had an impact on both supply side and demand side. On the demand side, this is quite obvious. I mean, there's a reduction of the level of employment. Thankfully, the level of income has been maintained in many countries thanks to the safety net provided by member states, by governments. but it won't last forever, and it will have an impact on the ability of people to pay for their housing costs. So, and as Freek mentioned, the number of evictions so far has been maintained to a low level because of the moratorium, but it's not going to last forever. And at some point, people expect really a sharp increase in evictions, which will also, I mean, indeed, potentially more homelessness, but also more demand for social housing. And COVID has also had an impact on the supply side, on the availability of the, well, in that case, the readiness or the willingness of the construction sector to provide for the necessary housing units. And in terms of funding, it's not very clear where we are now. In 2009, with the global financial crisis, clearly there was an impact on the finance which could be provided for social housing. And now today it's a bit a mixed picture, where we see it seems that actually money is not a problem anymore for member states, that the Stability and Growth Pact is not a problem anymore to invest in social infrastructures, including housing. So we are in a situation where potentially money could be available to continue to invest in social infrastructure, in infrastructures of opportunity, as I call them, and housing is definitely one of them. So we are in this situation, maybe unique situation, where we can decide politically to continue to invest in social housing and in the fight against housing exclusion, looking at the huge demand that is now materializing. And so that's really the situation where we are. But the gap has been growing and growing since 2009. So it's about time we decided to indeed bridge the gap with all the different elements that I mentioned earlier. So I don't know if you want me to stop now and have another round of discussion after that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, indeed, maybe Freek, I'll come back to you. You know, you've already mentioned some really obviously very promising examples and sort of innovative solutions aimed at sort of channeling investment to the people who most need it. I know you've only just touched upon them and the report gives more detail, but I wonder if you could give maybe your thoughts about what the EU can do to promote these better. You know, how do we take the example from Ireland or France, and how can the EU sort of get the message across to other member states?
Well, maybe first by starting to read the report. I think that would be a good start. No, but I think this is all about awareness raising and promoting good practices. It's totally within the area of competence of the European Union or even the EIB. So I don't think that's a problem. I think that we really have to do an effort to make a more effective link between the people that have the ideas when it comes to affordable housing solutions for the locked out, and the people that know how to turn it into an investment project. And that's not so complicated, I think, Laura. Like, that's just a question of doing it. Maybe in the advisory hub of the EIB, maybe there has to be a specific a sub-hub that advises on this kind of affordable housing solutions. I don't know, like there's plenty of options, but I don't think it needs to be complicated. It's certainly not an issue of subsidiarity or anything.
Helmut, we'll come to you. I haven't forgotten you there. I was wondering if you know, the experience of InvestEU's predecessor, it certainly highlighted the importance of national promotional banks, and it's been touched upon quite a few times already today. How do you see their impact in driving European investment in affordable housing?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the floor and having been invited me to this very important and timely discussion. I think what has been said previously by all the speakers underlined that we have to think in different options and in different ways to bring solutions to the people. And this brings me, first of all, to one issue with regard to social and affordable housing, and we are discussing with our members very intensively about this subject, and we realize that markets, if you would like to take the headline of today's conference, the housing markets, they are heavily fragmented all over Europe. So to take a solution which proves a good solution in one member state might not be the appropriate solution in another member state. However, I think we can think about the ideas behind the solution in different member states, and that was highlighted already. Here we should think how to transfer these ideas behind a good solution to another member state. But this needs not only the general know-how of project promoters and how to bring political ideas down to the market, but you need local and regional and national know-how. And here I think this is the main, or one of the main reasons why the European institutions asked national promotional banks institutions, and this is the association of ELTI. We are gathering more than 30 national promotional banks and institutions from all over Europe, where we were asked to come in to Invest EU in this case, to contribute to the solution in various aspects. Invest EU is not only social and affordable housing. The big part is investment and investment for SMEs and infrastructure, but it is also an investment, as they call it, social investment and skills. And I think it is a very positive signal from the European Commission and the legislators to try to bring financial instruments, not the pure grant, but financial instruments, loans, guarantees, and even equity solutions closer to social and affordable housing, because it is very clear for the moment that with a public budget alone, all these problems can't be solved. So we need to think about more innovative solutions for social and affordable housing. And this is again where our members will come into the market and try to combine experience they have from the market with local authorities, with regional authorities, with national authorities, but also with the European Union, because they are implementing a lot of different instruments, and try to bring together these instruments into one solutions. You mentioned EFSI, the predecessor of Invest EU, which I think was a very positive step, and the European Investment Bank, as the only implementing partner of EFSI, did a very good job in implementing this guarantee instrument. And I think the one or the other member of the European Parliament, the one or the other colleague in the European Commission I don't have the detailed view about the member states, but they saw that with regard to social infrastructure, there could have been achieved a bit more. I think this is the idea of InvestEU and the involvement of national promotional banks to come to bring in the experience we have. And it is not only to finance innovative solutions to build new homes. It is a much broader experience. It is a very intensive experience in renovating buildings. The prefabricated concrete buildings in Eastern Europe were mentioned already. It is how to bring together instruments from different levels into one instrument, and how to prepare investment platforms, which was mentioned already. And here we are happy to provide solutions. One last sentence to this. I think some of us here would have been more happy if the proposal of the European Commission with regard to the amounts for InvestEU would have been adopted, and we saw significant cuts in the decision of the European Council. So here we could have been achieved a bit more, but as Commissioner Schmit has already mentioned, it is not only InvestEU which is available for social and affordable housing. It is also the European structural investment funds, it's the RRF and other instruments and as well. And again, a combination of these instruments is a key challenge for the future.
Thank you. Just leading on from that, if national promotional banks are likely to be implementation partners of the new of InvestEU, I mean, do you have thoughts on how this will improve the funneling of investment, or is there a risk that this will further worsen the geographic difference that's been experienced with the previous plan?
Oh, that's difficult to predict how this will develop in the future. Freek mentioned already the need of national authorities to emphasize the need here, and they are in the driver's seat. InvestEU is a demand-driven instrument, and we need to help project promoters all over the place to develop good projects in all dimensions. That's clear, but it is not for financing partners, be them public, be them private, to say you public authority have to do this or that. It's the other way around. And here I think the advisory capacity is really needed, because that's what we see all over the place, that public authorities at regional or local level, they have sometimes the experience to deal with more innovative financing instruments. Yes, but we see many of them which could achieve more by benefiting from the experience from others. And this is really a very important and very relevant aspect of InvestEU to bring a significant amount of money down to the local and regional level, where we see the most in most of the member states the most relevance for social and affordable housing. But it is not only just to make a call for advisors and then let it happen. You have to understand all partners, the project promoters, the local authorities, the regional authorities, the financing partners. Everybody has to understand the cultural needs in the region, in the country. And this is the challenging part, but I think the construction of the advisory hub gives me very much hope that this can happen. Let's see whether it will happen, but I think it can happen.
That's very optimistic. It's good to hear. I was wondering, Julien, if we could come back to you. In your opinion, what do you think needs to change for social housing providers to meet the growth in demand for affordable housing?
So yeah, big question, of course. So first of all, I think we have to be clear, and it has been said many times, that the housing crisis that we are experiencing is a European reality, a European problem, but with local and national solutions, mostly, primarily. However, and the EU has a role to play, and I will maybe mention some of the issue that the EU can have an impact on. I mean, the first thing which I think is important to do from a European perspective is indeed maybe the capacity building, is basically to help countries where social housing is not existent, or as just do not deliver exactly what we expect, to help those countries to build proper policies, looking at how to set up the non-for-profit sector, how to fund them, how to regulate, how to also generate evidence. And this is, by the way, what we at Housing Europe we try to do with UN Habitat and UNEC in a quite an ambitious endeavor, which is called Housing 2030, where we try to figure out what could be, the key elements for a properly functioning social housing system. So capacity building is very important, also at the local level, at the city level. We were discussing earlier about the role of city when, in relation to the availability of land, but also there's a role to play in combining different financing schemes, including how to access European structural funds. Cities have a key role to play here as well. So capacity building is probably one of the key elements. The second element is a better knowledge of what we need. And I mentioned earlier the story of the evolving and changing housing needs. I think we need an understanding at the relevant level of the needs in terms of housing, related to, as I mentioned, migration, but also aging, which indeed has an impact. I mean, we see a reduction of the size of the households, but at the same time, an increase of the average square meter per person, in partly due to the fact that people want to live longer in their home, but also due to the fact that we have an increase of the number of lone parent families. And so we need a different type of housing. We also need a different type of housing now after COVID. It has been clear that the role of green spaces, the role of space size is crucial. I just take down an example in Brussels that from next year on, all new buildings will have to have either a terrace or a balcony. And this is a direct consequence of COVID, because people realized, governments realized that people need decent place to live in. So those evolving housing needs are very crucial to understand, also at the level of the European Commission. So after capacity building, better knowledge is essential, and it all leads then to adequate funding, as we said, and obviously some of the tools like InvestEU will have an impact, although, to be honest, it will have a marginal impact. What will have a big impact is the proper and, in a way, traditional funding from the member state, from the government budget, because this is where the majority of the funding for social housing comes usually. I mean, you have a mix of loans from public banks, you have loans from private banks, but you have subsidies as well, and you have a lot of tax exemptions. So this is a mix that comes from the governments, and so this is important, and member states are incentivized to continue to invest and actually to increase investment. And the role of the European Commission is important because the European semester for many years have asked the European member state to, in a way, consolidate their finances, public finances. Now it's the time for them to ask member states to increase investment in social and public affordable housing. I mentioned regulation earlier. Regulation is important. We need good practices. We need exchange of good practices on how cities can regulate, for instance, how to dedicate a proportion of any new development to social housing. This is something which is very common in many countries, in France, in the UK, and this is an interesting tool whereby you ask private promoters to dedicate part of their developments to social housing, and this is very effective. And we need in a way the ministries in charge of housing to exchange this kind of practices to incentivize them also to put in place this kind of thing. And so I think I mentioned almost a toolbox between capacity building, better knowledge, finance, regulation. This is key. I also want to mention the fact that for the first time, the European Parliament in January, in a resolution on access to affordable and decent housing, has actually promoted this kind of toolbox, a series of elements that will make the European approach to housing more coherent. And from indeed the role of the European semester to the importance of having modernized state aid rules, onto the importance of preventing what we call renoviction. So the fact that after a renovation, rent increase and will actually lead to an eviction. This is something that luckily in our sector does not happen. Indeed, this is one of the big added value of social housing providers, that they really do care for this kind of situation. And indeed, there is a renovation, and we are leading in renovating their homes. And at the same time, we maintain the global cost of living for people. So this kind of approach are important. We need this exchange at the EU level. Why not having again the ministers for housing properly meeting together regularly? And we think this is something that could really be beneficial. And thanks to the European Parliament resolution, we may have here a window of opportunities to promote that.
Thank you. It's nice to hear really concrete examples of where the exchange at European level really adds value.
Laura, if you allow just a short remark from my side to what Julien had said. I fully share your view on the responsibility of the public side, meaning the ministries for the financing of social housing. That's, I think, without this, nothing will happen on the ground. But I would like to expand a bit on what you have said towards the end with regard to renovation, because, and this was something Commissioner Schmit underlined as well, the renovation could be financed in a combination of public funding via grants or blending and financial instruments. So I think we should be open with regard to investments to all kinds of financing, because with the public funding only, with a traditional grant we know and many public authorities are very familiar with, we will not achieve the investments which are needed. So whatever can be financed in an alternative way, and even with private investors, could be done so that the small amount which is available could be concentrated to these areas which are where no market, where no private market exists. Let me give a very short example what private investment could mean. You know that the European Investment Bank, but also the bigger national promotional banks, as well as the Council of Europe Development Bank, they go to the global financial markets in issuing bonds all over the place. And here, private, mostly institutional investors, invest in bonds of these promotional institutions, and they channel the money to these kind of projects with a political background, meaning, for example, to promote the renovation, to promote new models for social and affordable housing, for example. And I think this is really important, that we always try to find solutions to channel money not coming from a public budget to ideas, to projects which are in the interest of the policymakers, and then leave the budget for those projects where we don't find money at all. I think this combination is crucial.
Thank you. Yeah, that actually touches upon indeed one of the questions that we'd had from the audience about housing bonds and how they could ensure that proceeds only flow to social and affordable housing and related support services. I was also wanting to touch on a comment that we've also had from the audience, from Johan Mirto, who's talking about state aid restrictions, the connection between the constraints of EU state aid rules and the pressure it's put on public investment in housing construction. I don't know, maybe Julien or Freek, you want to comment on this? I'm not sure who would be best.
Yeah, maybe I would try. I'm just going to try to look at the question precisely. Just looking at this in the Q&A. So what the question was, sorry.
It was in relation to Commissioner Schmidt's discussion earlier, but it was talking really about what are the thoughts about the connection with the constraints EU state aid rules or services of general economic interest rules have put on public investment in housing construction?
So yeah, I mean, this is a quite technical debate, looking at basically what is the scope? I mean, to which extent a government can support and finance social housing, and this is something which is quite important as well, because social housing is considered as, like actually hospital, as a service of general economic interest. So which basically means that social housing can be granted a kind of exception and an exemption of notification of the state aid to the European Commission. It sounds very technical, but actually it makes a big difference, because at the end of the day, it allows the proper funding of the social housing activities, actually both for new construction and renovation, on a quite long-term perspective. You don't need basically to do this lengthy process of notification to the Commission each time you do a project or a program. So this is an important point, and the European Commission in 2021 is supposed to revise, to review the rules to see whether we need to change that. I mean, our perspective is that this is a very important rules, and we need to maintain that because it helps really a smooth operation of the activities of social housing. We might need also to modernize them in a sense that, as I mentioned earlier, we are facing evolving housing needs, and we might need more flexibility in some cases to ensure that the right housing needs are met. In some circumstances, indeed, we were talking about the squeezed middle class. Actually, this is something that the OECD itself is mentioning. And in some circumstances, we might need to have some flexibility in how the social housing providers can operate and provide solutions to the new needs. But this has to be done not at the expense, and I fully agree with Freek, not at the expense of other fundamental activities of the sector. And actually, this is what the European Parliament resolution calls for. They call for, on the one hand, a modernization of the rules, but on the other hand, to ensure that the key objectives and the key missions of social housing will, on all the segments of the population, will be properly achieved and carried out. So, I mean, this is something that comes into the consideration when we look at all the regulatory framework that the EU is in a way putting for social housing. But as I said at the beginning, fundamentally, what we need to look at is the level of funding from the government into the social housing activities, so that they can perform the full range of their missions, from indeed fighting against homelessness into promoting employability of low-income families, but also providing support for lone parent families and migrant families, for instance. So this full range of activities, which has actually increased over the years, I mean, the need for proper funding, and this is at this level that the difference can be made.
Thank you. Just one last question before we turn to Yana. It's from Christoph Frank, and he's saying Germany has extensive and well-functioning financing systems, for social quality housing to protect social tenants. Exist rent and occupancy agreements. How do you ensure that EU financing, for example, InvestEU, is additional to this system and doesn't undermine or cannibalize them? I don't know if anyone has a particular insight. Freek, maybe?
Yes, like Germany performs well on many fronts, but like I can only look from the bottom end of society. The number of homeless people in Germany is huge. The number of people stuck in shelter is huge and increasing, also worsening because of Corona. It seems that the perfect system that exists in Germany doesn't work for this group, because they don't flow out into permanent housing solutions. So I don't know what the problem is in Germany, but it's not happening sufficiently. So if EU can help Germany to actually target that group and provide permanent housing solutions for them, I think it's a win. And that's not only the case in Germany, it's the case in many countries. I also would like to say, if you allow me, Laura, like Julien said, rightly so, that the EU budget and the EU financing mechanisms will not solve the housing crisis in Europe. You know, that's clear. But you need two big budgets. But for some problems, a small budget can make a huge difference. You know, that's in line with what Helmut said earlier on. Like the homeless population is huge, but it's not so huge actually in terms of funding that is required to provide solutions. So there you can actually make a difference. So, but there seems to be hesitance at European level to focus on these overlooked, marginalized problems where funding is not available. So I would like to change the mantra that was introduced by Commissioner Timmermans at the time, big on big, small on small. I think maybe we should be more big on small and actually have an impact. And that's certainly true in the area of housing. And one suggestion, if I may, in relation to the resilience and recovery, or recovery and resilience, I always forget what comes first, but the RRPs, There is quite a number of, it's a very opaque process and really difficult from a European NGO to get access to the different proposals, etc. I don't know why it is actually so opaque. I know why it's opaque, but it shouldn't be so opaque. But there seems to be quite a number of countries that are likely to invest a lot of money in housing, renovation and also affordable housing, or the combination of both. Why can the European Union, EIB or the European Commission not proactively bring these countries together to exchange experience and to make sure, or to help them, that that money is invested with the most possible impact? You know, it's low-hanging fruit for me. That is something that can be done. I know, for instance, countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, they are going to invest quite a lot on housing. Like, I think other countries as well. Why not bring them together in some kind of an informal setting? It can be quite useful. And the last thing I want to say, Laura, is when you talk about homelessness and housing, can we stop thinking as if homeless people only need temporary housing? It's ridiculous. Homeless people need permanent housing like any other person needs permanent housing. I was quite enthusiastic when I saw, when the European Bauhaus initiative was launched, that there was one of the projects that was put in the vitrine, like one of the showcase project that was put on the website, was a homeless project in Germany, a housing project for homeless people, but it was temporarily, only for a couple of years. And I just don't understand that. Like, if we manage to get investment into housing solutions for homeless, let's try to overcome this idea that they only need housing for a couple of years, because it's a nonsense.
Thank you, Freek. So yeah, now we'll bring in Yana. Yana is an Estonian member of the European Parliament and is part of Renew Europe group. She's the Vice Chair of the Committee of Petitions and a member of the Regional Development Committee. Yana, the floor is yours to bring together your reflections on what you've heard today.
Thank you, everybody. It was really a pleasure to listen to you. In the beginning, I thought, oh, I heard so much discussions of that topic, but it was really very interesting. So thank you, everybody. I didn't do my homework for, I had the task kind of reflect, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Yes, and I was shadowing two reports. So one was the report about homelessness, tackling homelessness in Committee of Petitions, which was short and clear. And another was, I was the member of Committee of Employment and Social Affairs 2 weeks ago. Now I moved to Regi. And I was also shadowing the report on homelessness and affordable housing in the Ample Committee. And it was not that clear and that short. Like many social reports, at the end of the day, it was what we called Christmas tree. But it was very interesting, and the work on that was very interesting, and we had several discussions also with Commissioner Schmit. And I have to say that in comparison with the first discussion where he took part on that with me in that issue, he was kind of more moderate today. And in my view, this is kind of signal of how the things go in European Union. And we have pretty good or pretty bad reasons for that. Of course, this is really very forward-looking project. And we have this overburden of housing costs, growing polarization of housing market, decrease of investment to public housing, and so on and so forth. But the main thing which was said today by Commissioner Schmit and also by several other speakers is that, and that was the main argument also in the parliament, and especially in my group, we are a liberal group, which means that among us is quite many MEPs who believe that Pillar of Social Rights is just kind of manifesto and we will never implement it. But nevertheless, the argument is that Europe has no competence in these issues, but this is European problem. And this is the core, in my view. Okay, of course, we can exchange best practices and do whatever, but will we succeed? This is another thing. And I don't remember, I think it was Helmut who said that, this variety of instruments is a big opportunity, but also a big challenge. And, in Russian, we say like, with 7 nannies, the child loses an eye. Or in English, if you put it into English, it's like many commanders sink the ship. But this story about eye and 7 nannies is kind of more adequate in this sense. And it makes me kind of careful when I look at all this variety of things. But on the other side, I remember very well when I was campaigning to European Parliament in 2014 with very strong social agenda. All my opponents always told me that you are running to the wrong place. European Parliament or Brussels or European Union do not deal with social issues. And now we are seeing very, really big social shift, which is very good and which really gives some hope. But if I go to these contributions of the speakers which we had today, I will start with FEANTSA contribution first. You know, it was a big discussion in the Parliament and we didn't reach any solution, and I don't see any solution till now. Maybe you will repair me. You spoke about homeless persons with statistics and everything, but we do not have a definition of homeless person. Homeless person is not necessarily the person who is sleeping under the bridge somewhere. You know, for Estonia, yesterday we had -30, and obviously nobody was sleeping under the bridges, which doesn't mean, and of course some of them moved into shelters, but some moved to friends, to relatives, whatever, you know, they are still homeless. There is another definition of homeless person, you know, this is a person who cannot register himself into the place where he lives for several months. I mean, if we have, I don't know, in two-bedroom apartment, 4 generations together, they're not homeless in that sense, but they have the same problem, basically. They just do have some relatives or some friends or somebody who let them live there. So I believe that if we want to tackle the problem efficiently, we have to create clear definition of homeless. And of course, we need clear data. I don't know, I mean, these were very impressive numbers, like 700,000 homeless people in Europe any given day. But I know for sure that, for instance, Estonia, my home country, last time submitted data on homelessness in 2011. So I believe that all these numbers are kind of outdated. Situation might be worse, especially now during pandemic. The second thing, it was mentioned like many times, social housing. Again, we don't have definition. What is this? I mean, and this story about state aid rules, of course, this is a very technical issue, but it's extremely important issue for if we do not widen the scope of people who are entitled to get social housing. I don't know if we will solve the problem. Let me give you a little small example. I know if I live in Finland, okay, Finland also was mentioned several times, like, you know, European paradise in terms of housing, but still, if I live in Finland and I don't know, I'm beaten up by my spouse and I go to Social Security and they give me the key from the apartment the same day and I move there and I'm entitled to have social housing. If I have the same problem in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, whenever else, I'm not entitled to. I stay here, I'm still a victim of domestic violence and I have nothing to do with social housing. So it would be great if we can solve these issues at the European level, but of course we always have this obstacle that no, this is not European competence. And Commissioner Schmit in the very beginning mentioned the European Pillar of Social Rights and especially Principle 19. As a member of Committee of Petitions for 7 years now, I know very well that, you know, Europeans are aware of their rights. They are aware of what is European Charter of Fundamental Rights, what is European Pillar of Social Rights, and the right, these petitions, we receive 2,000 to 3,000 petitions every year, and a big amount of them have this link to these European documents. What people do not know is that we did not implement Pillar of Social Rights. We do not even have a program how will we implement it. And the only instrument we have, and Commissioner Schmit didn't mention it today, he mentioned it several times before that, but not today. This is one of the main instruments. These are country-specific recommendations in the frame of European semester. But the problem with country-specific recommendation is that they have a really poor implementation rate. In the very beginning, like 10 years ago, some progress was like 76%, if I remember correctly, and now this is less than 30. And this is only some progress. This is not kind of, we implemented your recommendations, the European Commission. No, we did something a little bit, and this is like 30%. So this instrument does not work, and we see it very clearly. And we have no power to push member states to do it. And of course, we know very well that if we're going to push member states, it is physics, if you push somebody, they push you back. So this is not very popular point of view, I know, even in the European Parliament, but I know pretty much colleagues from the Committee of Employment. We are really hoping that Conference of Future of Europe will be that ambitious that we will be brave enough to look into treaties and at least to open debate. Maybe in some issues and in social issues also, we need less subsidiarity and more Europe. Otherwise, frankly speaking, I would not be very optimistic in terms that we will solve the problem. For if we look at this resolution of the European Parliament, I mean this big Christmas tree, like I called it, there is a lot of things which are not relevant to Europe as such, like touristification. Some colleagues were claiming that we have to regulate Airbnb services. For in some big cities, they're driving prices and people cannot afford housing and so on and so forth. But these are clearly things we cannot regulate at European level. For you cannot compare, I don't know, Venice city in Italy with the Kuressaare city on Saaremaa. If there is accidentally some Airbnb and there are some tourist-free weeks a year, this is not a problem. And of course, we have to look into problem of, I don't remember, sorry, who mentioned that. It's written somewhere, but I will not waste my time on looking, of depopulation of certain regions. Of course, this is a huge challenge. One thing is if you renovate and build something in the big city, in the capital city, and absolutely another thing if you have to do something on countryside. And now we have a Green Deal. For instance, in Estonia, we have Ida-Virumaa County, and we are trying to get rid of our oil shale production, which means that people are moving to the capital, which means that those who are staying, they're staying, many of them, in really bad conditions, and it will be very expensive to renovate something there. And of course, we need this common knowledge and this understanding of all these procedures. But I really believe that if we will have clear European set of, I don't know, what is decent housing, what is homelessness, who is entitled to get social housing, it would be much easier to solve these problems. And one last remark, I'm not very logical, I understand, but I just wrote up while I was listening, that's why I'm jumping from topic to topic. Somebody mentioned that we can create big social housing units in the hotels and so on. This is how we create bad neighborhoods. If we put a big amount of problem people, so to say, let's say homeless people, to one certain region together, I don't know, 200 of them, this is how we create bad neighborhoods, which means that I don't believe this is a good solution. And of course, they need social aid. It has to be a very complex approach. But once again, by the end of the day, I'm very happy that we are having this discussion. I maybe didn't sound very optimistic, but I believe that this is very good that we still have it, and we have it in different panels and different conferences, and Parliament is looking at the issue. But I'm very much looking forward for Conference of Future of Europe. I believe that we have to implement the Pillar of Social Rights, and I believe that we have to make all these country-specific recommendations binding for member states. Otherwise, we will not solve the problem. And here, I'm afraid I have to come back to this 7 nannies and the child without an eye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yana. I think it's completely fair to say that we could have at least another 2-hour discussion on some of the points you brought in there. I think, yeah, maybe it's clear that there are definitely positives on the horizon. We've heard about some of the examples today from FEANTSA in terms of really, local or national solutions, also from the Commissioner in terms of European measures that we want to see. We'll of course have to see what the action plan on the European pillar brings us in a week or so. And of course, yeah, the conference on the future of Europe as well. And indeed the recovery resilience plans and how the semester evolves within the context of that, and how whether the recovery resilience facility now does give the Commission that extra emphasis and extra sort of stick, if you like, in terms of pushing member states to implement some of the country-specific recommendations, which actually, as you say, have been poorly implemented and getting worse, unfortunately, over the recent years. Yeah, I think that all that remains for me to say now is really a thank you. Thank you to all of the speakers that we've had with us today. I really appreciate that you've given us your time, and definitely all of your really useful insights into the problems as we're seeing them. And also thank you very much to the audience for participating. From the EPC point of view, we'll continue to be engaged in this discussion, and clearly investigating some of the different aspects that we've touched upon today. So I hope that we'll see you all again at an EPC event in the future. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.